Today I'm reviewing a recently renovated 1960s era apartment in Madrid, Spain. This place looks beautiful in photos, but there are some drawbacks to it, which I'm going to point out to you here, because I'm here to maximize your home's resale value through good design, link in the description, but for now, let's take a look inside this apartment. So here in the living room, it's a pretty colorful setup, but the obvious eye catcher is this coral pink storage unit, which can store so much, and I'll talk about that in a minute. But to the right of that is the living room space, and they've got this pale cream corrugated panel that's running vertically along the back wall, which adds some shadows and texture to the space in a pretty unique way. Now, this is not something you see very often, but it's really nice how the light hits it. Plus, this will act as a bit of an acoustic treatment in here, which is also nice because with really hard floors like they've got in here, you won't have as much sound bouncing around. And this is especially good because you've got the kitchen, living room, and dining room all right here in the same place. And so between the corrugated wall and the tall bird of paradise plant in front of it, they make the room feel taller and larger than it is. Now, of course, we already have reasonably high ceilings in here to begin with, but doing something simple like this can make a pretty big difference. But let's talk about color in here, because here in the living room, they've really leaned into two colors. This dark blue we see on the sofa, the radiator, this low profile storage unit, and in a lighter tone on the ottoman. And then of course, the other color is the coral pink that they've got on the cushions, the rug, the hanging pendant lamp, this photo frame, and of course the cabinets that border the kitchen. And because they've got neutrals everywhere else, on the walls, the ceiling, and the floors, this works really nicely. Plus, with these splashes of green from the plants, it's a really cohesive palette that still doesn't overwhelm your eye because the colors themselves are quite muted. But one thing they've missed here is the opportunity to create a real conversation zone, because with the exception of this tiny ottoman, which would not be comfortable to sit on for long, the couch is the only place to sit, and because there's no TV here, the couch is kind of just facing nothing. Now, I'm not saying you need a TV here by any means, but it would be nice to have that conversation zone where people can hang out and talk to each other. So I would actually twist the couch here and put it in front of the radiator, and then put a couple of more chairs across from the couch so that you can have people facing each other. This would also open up the space so that if someone's in the kitchen or dining room but still wants to talk to whoever's in the living room, they can because the couch is facing them rather than having its back to them. Now, in the kitchen, they've actually used a very similar palette because of course, we still have this massive coral built-in storage unit, and then on the other side of the kitchen, another built-in unit in the same deep navy that we saw in the living room. And then they've also added in a third color here with this bright yellow on the stools and the lamp over the countertop. And again, just like in the living room, the reason the colors work in here is because the floors, the ceilings, and the walls are all neutral. And so they allow the colors to shine without completely overwhelming the space. Now, there's too much color in here for my taste, and I would replace the yellow with some natural wood elements because so far, most of the things we've seen in this home are really glossy and smooth and made with synthetic materials. So I would have loved to see some natural wood elements here and just let the storage units be the pop of color. Because keep in mind that the more color you inject into a space, the more you narrow the number of people who are going to like it. And so if you were staging a home for sale, going with such bold colors like this will definitely narrow your buyer's pool. Some people will love it, but others will think it's too much and it'll turn them off right away. Now, obviously, one restriction they face in this kitchen is building around this concrete column, which is an eyesore in here and definitely cuts up the space, but you don't want to completely close it off with a cabinet or something because it's just going to destroy any sort of flow in the kitchen. So I would have extended the countertop out here in an L shape to give yourself just a little bit more workspace and dining space here, because as it is now, they've got two stools here, but they're really tight together. And one person can't even eat from there because their plate is going to be halfway into the sink. But instead, if they had extended the countertop out here in an L shape, they would have both gained a lot more space for meal prep, but also they could have put two stools across from each other and create more of an intimate dining experience. Of course, they do have the dining room, which I'm sure they use more frequently, but for a quick meal or a more casual moment, this would make a lot of sense. Another thing that would have been really nice here is to actually build a little dining nook into the window. They don't have space for anything permanent there, but even adding in something like a folding table that sits flush with the wall when you're not using it, but can be folded up into a tiny surface for just having a coffee or breakfast in the window there, where you can take in the fresh air and observe the city life below, that would be such a nice touch. Okay, now let's take a look at the dining room where they're carrying a similar yellow through on this vertical tiled wall, but do you notice how it works better in here because it's less of a bold, bright yellow and more of a mustard yellow? In my view, that's a big part of the reason why it works so nicely as the backdrop to this sideboard. but the original wall in here is this beautiful terracotta brick, which also could have worked nicely, but adding in the yellow tiles just helps to bounce the light around the room a little bit more, which is good since they've only got one small window in here. Now, let's be honest, having 4 people around this table is going to be a bit crammed, and I do love that they have these plants behind the table, but for whoever's sitting over there, they're not going to have much space to maneuver at all. So they really need to do a better job of positioning the plants, and I would suggest removing this vertical shelving unit entirely to make the dining space more open. But I have to say, I am glad that they brought in some natural materials in the wooden table and the chairs with these woven seats to warm up the room. But I actually want to talk more about what's behind the dining room, which is the bedroom, because you can see from here that they've matched the color on the mustard tiles with this really elegant mustard curtain instead of using an actual physical door. Now, this does create a cool sort of openness between the bedroom and the rest of the home, where most of the time you'll have the curtain open and you can easily go in and out. But at the same time, the curtain is going to have to be pretty thick to block out the sounds of the kitchen and the other public spaces for whoever's in the bedroom, and if it's not, then noise will be an issue without a proper door here. Now, again, the palette in the bedroom is the same mustard yellow and deep navy blue that we've seen throughout the dining room here, so we've left the coral pink in the kitchen and living room. And to be honest, there's nothing particularly significant about the bedroom itself, but they've still managed to turn it into an elegant, high-end space through the materials that they use in here. The floors are the same as what they've got through the rest of the apartment, and they've got more fluted plastering on the wall behind the bed, which will absorb some sound, which is definitely a positive thing in here. But what I really love is the decision to put a concrete headboard behind the bed, which makes the space feel strong and really well defined. They've also got concrete wrapped pendant lights hanging next to the bed, but they're pointing down, so if you want to use them as reading lights, it's not really going to work. But then they've also got this LED lightsaber light leaning against the corner of the room, which adds to the industrial aesthetic in here. And then here in the bathroom, things get a little moodier still, with the deep blue-gray terrazzo, the vanity that leans a little more orange than the coral we saw in the other rooms, and the black sink and fixtures. It looks really sleek in here. It's not all that large, but with the mirror both in front of the sink and beside it, it makes the room feel that much more spacious. Now, we don't have any photos of where the toilet is in here, but I'm assuming there's enough space that you can use it comfortably without being wedged up against anything, which is a common issue in smaller bathrooms, but I'm pretty sure they're okay in here. But one thing this bathroom does have going for it is that even though it's in the deepest corner of the home, it still has an external window, which is a huge bonus. Of course, the window is inside the shower, so if this was your home, you may want to use frosted glass, but this is a Spanish home in Madrid, so they don't mind letting it all hang out. But a few things to keep in mind if you want to replicate this look in your own home. First, a matte black sink is going to show toothpaste stains very quickly, so you'll need to pay extra attention to keeping it clean. And also, having the mirror go all the way down to the vanity like a backsplash means it's going to get splashed from the sink all the time, especially because the sink has a flat bottom, so you're going to have to wash these mirrors every couple of days. But what can we learn from this apartment? First, this is what's possible when you use colors cohesively throughout your home. They used an unusual palette in here of deep navy, mustard yellow, and coral pink, but because they used each of them tastefully, the end result is pretty impressive. I would have personally liked to see them use more natural tones, and specifically more wood in here to warm up the home, but overall, they executed this well. Second, there are some small, subtle tricks you can use to make your ceilings feel higher. A couple of them we already spoke about, like the vertical corrugated paneling and the very tall bird of paradise plant, both of which draw your eye upward. But we didn't talk about the built-in kitchen cabinets, which run floor to ceiling and also help to elevate the space. And third, if you lean into more masculine design, there are some lessons to be learned from the bedroom and bathroom here. There's nothing special about the bones of these rooms themselves, but the way they've used stonework and darker tones in these rooms really gives them that deep masculine feel. So if you're a man who's looking to redesign his bedroom or bathroom, take a second look at these and think a bit more deeply about how you can incorporate what you see here into your own space. So I'm dissecting a ton of apartments like this one, so make sure you subscribe if you want to see more of these videos. If you want to take what you've learned here to the next level, the link is in the description. And if you want to see another very colorful apartment with one of the most unique kitchen islands I've ever seen, check out this video up here where I break it down. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the comments.